Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get into something pretty unsettling, actually, in the world of cybersecurity. It's this evolving threat to, well, your digital lifelines, your backups. For years, we've worked really hard to protect our live systems, sturdy firewalls, good antivirus, network segmentation. We felt maybe reasonably confident. But what happens when those frontline systems are compromised? Because, let's be honest, sometimes breaches just get through. That's where backups come in, right? They're meant to be the ultimate safeguard, the digital life raft that lets you recover, get things back on track.
But what's truly fascinating and deeply concerning is how the threat landscape has just fundamentally changed. Attackers, they aren't just looking to, encrypt your production environment anymore and demand a ransom. They become way more sophisticated
Strategic.
and, frankly, quite cunning. They're now actively targeting your backups first.
First, before the main systems.
Often, yes, to completely cripple your ability to recover. This approach, well, it significantly increases their leverage. Makes it far more likely you'll just pay the ransom because, honestly, without a viable path to restore, what are your options? They dwindle fast. It's a calculated thing, a meticulously engineered takedown of your whole defense posture.
Wow. And speaking of essential solutions, robust data protection, we're thrilled to have Stonefly as our sponsor for this deep dive. As a leader in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, and also AI storage and cloud solutions, Stonefly really gets it. They understand that in today's threat environment, secure, ransomware-proof storage is, well, it's non-negotiable. So if you're looking for that robust data protection, maybe including air-gapped and immutable storage, you can contact them at sales@stonefly.com. Schedule a demo. They're really on the front lines, making sure your data is safe when it absolutely matters most. Okay, with that foundation set, let's really plunge into why our backups have become, well, the new ground zero in this cyber warfare. So let's kick off with understanding how we even got here. To this unsettling point, this isn't just about simple data encryption anymore, right? It's about these sophisticated, targeted attacks aiming right for your recovery mechanisms. Can you maybe walk us through how ransomware evolved to make our backups its main target?
Absolutely. And it's quite a story, actually. The history of ransomware, it's a stark lesson in constant adaptation, escalating ambition. It started pretty subtly, way back in 1989, believe it or not, with the AIDS Trojan, spread via floppy disks.
Floppy disks, wow.
Yeah, it acted more like a traditional virus, really, but it had that ransom demand attached. Then, fast forward to the early 2010s, we saw variants like CryptoLocker, mostly spreading through phishing emails, encrypting user files, and Petya, which took it a step further, encrypting entire master file tables, locking people right out of their operating systems. These attacks, they were destructive, sure, but mostly indiscriminate, like casting a wide net, seeing who'd pay up.
Okay, so from a floppy disk virus to locking up your whole system, that's already a huge leap. But I get the feeling there's more to it.
Oh, indeed. Much more. Around 2018, maybe 2019, the game changed dramatically. We shifted from those automated sort of spray and pray attacks to highly targeted human-operated ransomware, often delivered as ransomware as a service, or RES.
Right, so like criminals leasing out the attack tools.
Exactly. Criminal enterprises could essentially lease the tools, the infrastructure, everything needed to deploy really sophisticated attacks. But they didn't stop at just encryption. Then we saw the rise of what's called double extortion. This is where attackers don't just encrypt your data. They steal it first. They exfiltrate copies before encrypting anything.
Oh, wow. So even if you can restore from a backup, they've still got your sensitive data. That's nasty.
It is incredibly insidious.
Yeah.
The ransom demand then becomes twofold. Pay to get your data decrypted and pay again to stop them leaking that stolen data publicly. On the dark web or selling it, we saw this play out devastatingly in 2020. Attacks on universities. Even after they successfully restored from backups, they still felt, well, compelled to pay ransoms to prevent student data exposure. This just fundamentally changed the game. Suddenly, just having a backup wasn't enough to prevent all the damage. It forced organizations to think about reputation, privacy laws, the long-term hit of data leakage, even if they could technically recover their systems.
That's a chilling thought. It really is. It's like they're not just locking your front door anymore. They're taking your valuables out the back first, then messing with the locks and maybe going for the spare key you hid under the mat. This truly feels like a paradigm shift, where the recovery mechanism itself is the primary target.
Exactly right. They're no longer just denying access. They're actively trying to erase the very means of recovery. These aren't random hits anymore. They are, as some call them, carefully engineered takedowns of defenses. Threat actors now meticulously work to disable backup agents, the software components doing the backup work. They delete snapshots, those point-in-time copies. They modify retention policies to shorten how long backups are kept, effectively making older clean copies just vanish.
So the good copies disappear faster.
Right. They encrypt network-accessible backup volumes.
Yeah.
And they relentlessly exploit known vulnerabilities in integrated backup platforms. This means that your fundamental ability to recover is precisely what's being targeted. It's just not enough anymore to simply have backups. They have to be secure, really secure, and sufficiently isolated from your main production environment. If your backup system is just another node on your network, easily accessible, it's a vulnerability just waiting.
So, okay, how do these attackers actually pull this off? How do they spread from, say, a compromised workstation into the backup infrastructure? What are the common techniques we're seeing?
There are several key techniques, and they're quite sophisticated. One of the most common is lateral movement. Once an attacker gets that initial foothold, maybe through phishing, maybe an unpatched web server, they don't just stay there. They try to spread horizontally, right? Across your network, looking for more valuable targets. And your backup infrastructure, that's usually very high on their list. A really common method for this is exploiting Active Directory, AD.
The keys to the kingdom, essentially.
Pretty much. If an attacker gains control of a privileged AD account, they can then use that access to pivot, escalate privileges, and boom, gain control of your backup servers, your repositories. AD is often the central identity system, so compromising it can basically open almost every door.
That makes total sense. AD controls access, so if they own AG, they can grant themselves access anywhere. What other ways do they get in?
They also target virtual host takeover scenarios. Lots of backup servers and repositories, they run as virtual machines, right? So attackers look for misconfigurations or vulnerabilities in the hypervisors themselves, like VMware vSphere or Microsoft Hyper-V, or even in the guest tools installed inside the VMs. If they can gain control of the hypervisor, well, they effectively control all the virtual machines running on it, including your backup server. It's like having a master key to your whole virtual world.
Oof.
Another big one is Windows-based software attacks. Threat actors are really adept at exploiting built-in Windows services, common third-party apps, known behaviors across Windows versions. They use all that to find entry points into the backup software, the repositories, even the underlying Windows OS that many backup systems run on. And of course, they're constantly looking for and exploiting high-severity CVEs, common vulnerabilities, and exposures. They often breach backup hosts and their components before organizations have even had a chance to patch, which is why that proactive patching strategy is just paramount.
It sounds like everything's so connected. One weak link can really compromise the whole chain. Speaking of connections, what about single points of failure? Especially now, everyone's relying more on cloud backups.
Yeah, that's a major pitfall. A trap many organizations fall into without realizing it. Just moving your backups to the cloud doesn't automatically make them secure or isolated. Not at all. If you rely on a single cloud provider, especially if your backup infrastructure and your source systems share the same ecosystem, well, that creates a significant single point of failure. Think about it. Say you're backing up your Microsoft 365 data within Microsoft's own cloud environment, and you're using the same Microsoft credentials to access both M365 and the backup storage.
Uh-oh. I see where this is going.
Right. If an attacker steals those credentials or gains API access to that Microsoft environment, they can potentially compromise both your production data and your backups simultaneously. There's often no inherent logical or authentication separation built in by default in that kind of setup.
So if your front door keys and your back door keys are essentially stored together, even if it's a fancy cloud lockbox, one stolen key opens both doors.
Exactly. If your backup environment isn't specifically designed with this evolving threat in mind, if it's not truly isolated, segmented from your primary production systems and their credentials, it's at high risk, extremely high risk of getting compromised. And that leaves you with zero recovery options when ransomware hits, which is the place no organization ever wants to be. Think of it like a bank vault again. It's not enough to have a strong vault door anymore. Modern robbers, they're going for the key custodian. They're disabling alarms from the inside. They're even trying to compromise the vault's foundation. Your backups need their own, entirely separate, hardened vault with a different key, different guards, ideally completely different security mechanisms, so compromise in one area just cannot propagate to the other.
That really drives home how critical this is. It's a complete shift in mindset needed for cyber resilience. Which leads us perfectly into our next section. The new gold standard, the 3-2-1-1-0 backup strategy. For years, the 3-2-1 rule was the standard. right? But today's threats, they demand something way more robust. Here's where it gets really interesting. That's where the 32110 strategy steps in. Can you break down each component for us? Explain the why behind it, especially in the context of modern ransomware.
Absolutely. And this strategy, it really is an essential evolution, a necessary adaptation to the current, much more aggressive threat landscape. It builds on that solid foundation of the old rule, yeah, but adds these crucial layers of resilience, specifically designed to thwart these sophisticated attacks.
Right.
Let's start with the 3 copies of data. This means 1 production copy plus at least 2 separate backup copies. But it's not just about the number of copies. It's about the quality, the completeness of those copies. For real resilience, rapid recovery from ransomware, you absolutely need image-based backups.
Image-based, so the whole system.
Exactly. The whole system, OS, applications, settings, all your data, captured as a single, consistent image. This allows for complete system recovery, not just, restoring files here and there. When you're looking at backup solutions, look for capabilities like bare metal recovery, restoring an entire system directly onto new hardware, and instant virtualization spinning up a compromised system from its backup as a VM almost immediately. Minimizes that downtime.
Got it. So not just files and folders, but literally a complete bootable snapshot of your entire IT environment.
Precisely. And a really strategic move here for maximum isolation. Use a dedicated backup appliance. Could be physical, could be a purpose-built virtual appliance.
Yeah.
Ideally, these appliances should be built on a hardened Linux OS.
Why Linux specifically?
Good question. Because it significantly reduces the attack surface compared to Windows-based systems. Windows is dominant, right? For end users, many servers. So it's more frequently targeted by ransomware, has a larger ecosystem of known vulnerabilities. Using a Linux-based appliance creates a kind of natural barrier against a lot of that common Windows-centric malware. Okay, next, the 2. For 2 different media formats. This means storing your backups on distinct media types. Diversify your risk. For example, 1 copy on local disk storage, a NAS, a SAN, and another copy on, say, cloud storage. The rationale is simple. If one media type gets compromised, maybe your local disk array gets hit by malware specific to that storage, or just fails physically, the other media type, like your cloud storage, might still be totally safe, untouched. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Makes sense. Exactly. Ensures you have an alternative path to recovery. Then we have the first one, for 1 offsite copy. This has always been crucial for disaster recovery, right? But its importance is even more amplified now. You need to make sure at least 1 backup copy is geographically separated from your main data center or office. Protects you against major localized disasters, floods, fires, earthquakes, or even site-wide cyber attacks that could just devastate your whole primary infrastructure. And a critical addition here is something that really marks out a robust strategy. Implement a physical or logical air gap wherever possible.
An air gap. That's truly isolating the data, isn't it? Like literally taking a tape off-site or having a network segment with 0 connection unless absolutely needed.
Exactly that. Think of it as your comet hitting the building scenario protection. If everything else fails, if your entire network is just obliterated or deeply compromised, you still have that air-gapped off-site copy, physically or logically disconnected. It simply cannot be reached by a network-borne attack. There's no continuous connection. So ransomware, no matter how clever, it just can't traverse that gap to encrypt or delete your absolute last resort. Now, for the second one, and arguably this is the most crucial one, the absolute game changer against modern ransomware. 1 immutable copy.
Immutable.
Unchangeable? Exactly. This is a vital addition to the old 3-2-1 rule, specifically designed to counter that attacker tactic of destroying backups. You must maintain at least 1 backup copy in immutable storage. Could be immutable cloud storage, could be an immutable appliance. Immutable means it cannot be altered, encrypted, or deleted. Not by ransomware, not by a malicious insider, not even by a compromised admin account with full root privileges.
Wow. So even if an attacker gets full admin control, gets the highest privileges, they literally cannot touch that copy. It's like writing it in stone, not just on a whiteboard you can wipe clean.
That is precisely the power of immutability. It fundamentally counters the ransomware tactic of destroying your recovery points. Even if a highly privileged admin account gets compromised and used to try and wipe out all your backups, the immutable copy remains, untouched, available for restoration. It provides you with a guaranteed recovery point no matter how deep the attacker gets. It's your last unyielding line of defense. And finally, the 0 stands for 0 errors. This part emphasizes that your backups have to be regularly verified, tested, monitored, ensure they're error-free, and most importantly, recoverable. Your strategy isn't complete until you have 100% confidence in your ability to recover data from any of those copies. And this isn't theoretical. It means actual hands-on testing.
That's huge. And yeah, one that organizations often overlook, right? I mean, I've heard so many horror stories, IT folks who thought they had backups,
Oh, absolutely.
only to find them corrupted, incomplete, totally inaccessible when disaster struck. It's like having a parachute you've never packed or tested, just hoping it opens when you jump. What's a common sort of facepalm moment you've seen? An organization hitting a wall during recovery because they missed this zero error step.
Oh, it's astonishingly common, a recurring one. Organizations dutifully backing up to disk. They see that backup successful message every single night, assume everything's fine, but they never actually perform a full system restore to a test environment, like ever. Then a major incident hits. Ransomware, hardware failure, corrupted database, whatever. They go to restore and find that while, yeah, maybe the files are there, the system state isn't consistent, or key applications just won't launch, or the backup software itself fails during the restore because it was never patched, or its own database got corrupted somewhere along the line.
Oh, no.
Suddenly, what looked like a perfect backup on paper is completely useless for a full system recovery. Turns a really bad day into an absolute catastrophe. The Euro errors is about proving recoverability, not just assuming it. It's about pulling that parachute cord regularly in a controlled environment to make damn sure it deploys perfectly when you really need it.
That makes perfect sense. Build confidence through rigorous verification. Okay, that brings us really smoothly to Section 3, hardening your backup infrastructure general best practices. The 32110 rule gives us the blueprint, right, for resilience. But a blueprint is only as good as the building itself. How do we take these principles and translate them into the practical, hands-on hardening of the very infrastructure holding these vital backup copies?
Excellent question. Because, yeah, the strategy is only as good as its implementation. And these best practices, they're the nuts and bolts. First, it's about secure network deployment. You absolutely must deploy your backup servers in a highly secure, segregated LAN environment. This means severely limiting their accessibility from your broader production network. And absolutely no direct inbound access from the internet. None. The more isolated your backup server is, the harder it is for an attacker who's already inside your main network to even reach it. Think of it like putting your crown jewels behind multiple locked doors deep inside your digital fortress.
All right, cordon it off as much as you possibly can. Keep it away from the everyday network traffic.
Exactly. Secondly, the paramount principle of least privilege, PLP. Cannot stress this enough. Rigorously restrict access using role-based access control, RBAC. No local domain accounts should ever have admin rights over your backup systems, period. If a normal domain user's credentials get stolen, you absolutely do not want them to be able to access, modify, or delete your backups, your backup admins. They should have dedicated personal accounts just for backup tasks, and those accounts should only have the minimal permissions absolutely necessary for their specific backup roles, nothing more. This significantly limits the blast radius if any credentials do get compromised.
That's critical for limiting potential damage. Okay, what about network segmentation itself? How granular should we be getting there?
Network segmentation is absolutely paramount. You need to segment your backup networks with no inbound traffic from the internet. Ideally, only allow outbound connections initiated by the backup system itself, maybe for cloud replication, things like that. Only the systems being protected should be able to communicate with the backup server. And even then, only on specific necessary ports. You should employ a robust firewall to strictly enforce these network access controls. Use port-based access control lists, ACLs, on your network switch ports to whitelist precisely what traffic is allowed in or out. This creates a kind of virtual moat around your entire backup environment. Makes it incredibly difficult for attackers to move laterally into it.
And encryption. For the data itself, as it travels and when it's sitting there on the storage.
Absolutely critical. You should deploy agent-level encryption. This means the data gets encrypted at the source system before it even hits the network to go to the backup repository. And crucially, use a unique encryption key, generated with your own passphrase, stored securely and separately from the backup data itself. This adds another vital layer, makes the data unreadable even if the storage medium somehow gets compromised or stolen by an attacker. It's a fundamental cryptographic control.
Okay, we're talking about closing off any potential opening for attackers, so disabling unnecessary things sounds pretty critical too.
That leads directly to reducing the attack surface. Always disable any unused services and ports on your backup systems. Every open port, every running service that isn't absolutely necessary for the backup software to function. It represents a potential attack vector, something an adversary could maybe exploit. The less you have exposed, the less opportunity an attacker has to gain that foothold. Minimize what's exposed, simplify the system down to its core function.
In MFA, multi-factor authentication, It seems like it's non-negotiable for pretty much everything these days, right? Especially for systems this critical.
Without a doubt. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. Preferably strong methods like biometrics or hardware tokens, not just, TOTP apps if you can help it, should be enabled for all access to your backup environment. Logging into the server, the backup console, any cloud portals involved, all of it. Even if an attacker manages to steal credentials, sophisticated phishing, whatever MFA provides another critical layer of defense, makes it exponentially harder for them to actually gain access. It's just a fundamental security control. Should be everywhere.
Staying up to date with software patches feels like basic hygiene, but I know it's often overlooked or delayed for critical systems like backups. People worry about disrupting operations.
It is basic hygiene, but yeah, it's astonishing how often it gets neglected. Patching and updates are absolutely non-negotiable. Keep your backup systems patched. Up to date with the latest security updates, firmware too. Avoid exposure to known vulnerabilities. Attackers actively scan for unpatched systems. They know they're easy targets. Establish a clear, separate patching schedule for your backup infrastructure. Distinct from your production systems, that helps manage it without breaking things. And finally, never forget physical security. Secure all backup devices physically. Locked enclosures, controlled server rooms, access logs, surveillance maybe. A physical breach, someone just walking away with a backup drive, can be just as devastating as any cyber attack.
These are really solid general best practices, apply to pretty much any backup environment. But what about the nuances of cloud backups? Seems like a lot of organizations are moving at least part of their strategy to the cloud. Specific considerations there.
Yeah, cloud-based backup security needs very special attention. Because, just like your on-prem systems, ransomware can and absolutely does target cloud platforms. Even if your data is in the cloud, segmentation and isolation are just as critical there as in your physical data center. For data segmentation and isolation in the cloud, your backup data absolutely must reside in a separate cloud infrastructure with its own completely separate authentication system. You have to avoid any reliance on production-stored secrets, API keys, credentials that are also used for your primary cloud environment. This is how you build a true cloud air gap. This separation dramatically reduces the risk of a compromised production environment impacting your backups. If your primary cloud account gets breached, the attacker should not automatically gain access to your backup data.
So it's not enough for the cloud provider to just say, yeah, we back stuff up. You need to ensure your backups are logically walled off from your production stuff, even if they're both sitting in, say, AWS or Azure. It requires deliberate architecture.
Precisely. And this also extends to how you design your private cloud architecture for backups. Choose backup services that physically or logically move your backup data entirely out of your source production environment into an alternative cloud environment. Maybe a dedicated private cloud, or a hardened, purpose-built private cloud solution like those offered by vendors like Stonefly. This creates that logically isolated environment, shielded completely from your original access vectors. That's what truly delivers the air-gapped protection needed today. Shared environments where your production and backup assets might live in the same shared tenancy or under the same umbrella of admin credentials. That just makes it much easier for attackers to discover, access, or destroy both in one go.
And just like on-prem, access control and authentication are absolutely paramount for cloud backups too.
Well, absolutely. Authentication and access control for cloud backups, they need to be built on a completely separate identity system. Implement strong MFA again, biometric or hardware-based preferred for privileged accounts. Rigorous RBAC, strictly limiting permissions. You also need robust alerting configured. For any unauthorized changes to your cloud backup environment, someone removes a backup agent, someone modifies retention policies, you need to know immediately. And this is the critical takeaway here. Credentials, API tokens, secrets for your cloud backup environment must never be stored in the same ecosystem that's being backed up. So, if you're backing up Microsoft 365, your backup credentials should not be stored within Azure Active Directory. Manage them entirely outside your production environment. Eliminate any dependency. This ensures that if your primary production environment gets compromised, the attacker doesn't immediately get the keys to your cloud backups too.
Okay, so we've covered the strategy, the 32110 rule. We've covered general hardening steps. Now, to make this really actionable, let's dig into Veeam Backup and Replication. We picked Veeam because, well, it's incredibly widely used, right? And it's had some recent high-profile vulnerabilities, makes it an excellent real-world case study, shows how these best practices apply practically in a major enterprise tool. And hey, even if you don't use Veeam, the principles behind these hardening steps, they're universally crucial for securing pretty much any backup solution. Let's move into Section 4, deep dive into Veeam Backup Server Hardening.
Yeah, Veeam Backup and Replication VBR, it's definitely one of the most popular solutions out there. So these tips are super relevant, directly applicable for a lot of folks. Okay, tip number 1. Do not domain join the backup server in the production domain. This is fundamental, top level, but often overlooked. Think about it. If ransomware is active, say, in a compromised roaming profile of a domain user, and they connect to a domain join VBR server, that malware can activate on the VBR server, directly impact your backups. Similarly, if a domain user who does have admin access to the VBR server gets their workstation compromised, ransomware can then activate on the VBR server's drives, compromise your whole backup repository.
So joining it to the main domain just extends the potential blast radius right into your backups.
Yeah. Exactly. For smaller setups, just putting the VBR server in a workgroup, not part of your main Active Directory domain, eliminates this specific attack vector. Simple for larger environments. The ideal solution is a separate, isolated management domain. Just for your VBR server, other critical Veeam components like proxies, repositories, creates a logical air gap at the identity level. And this best practice is so critical. Ignoring it, unfortunately, led directly to that severe vulnerability. CVE-2025-23121 allowed remote code execution on domain-joined VBR servers using standard domain user credentials. Highlights this exact risk perfectly. Number 2, do not use RDP for the backup server. Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP. Notoriously common entry point for attackers to get interactive control of a server. Instead of RDPing directly, use the Veeam console application. Install it on a separate, hardened management server. And when you access the VBR server through that console, log on with a regular, non-local admin local user account. Reinforces that principle of least privilege again.
So access it through its own tools, not generic remote access.
Right. For physical VBR servers, use the out-of-band management interfaces. HPE's ILO, Dell's IDR-FI, they give you direct console access without needing the network RDP service. For virtual machines, use the Hypervisor Console vSphere client, Hyper-V Manager. You should even consider just disabling the RDP service entirely on the VBR server for maximum security. Only enable it temporarily, under strict control if absolutely necessary for troubleshooting. Number 3, do not use other roles on the backup server. A backup server should be dedicated, single-purpose, backing up data. That's it. Having other server roles installed on the same machine like WSUS for updates, an antivirus management server, a file server, God forbid a domain controller, it just significantly increases the attack surface.
More stuff running means more ways in.
Yeah, exactly. Each extra role adds more services, more open ports, more software that could have vulnerabilities, more complexity to exploit. Install only the software absolutely needed for Veeam Backup and Replication to function. Keep it lean. Keep it focused. Number 4, schedule maintenance for Windows updates on all Veeam components. Okay, automated updates can sometimes disrupt running backups, true, but unpatched systems, inherently vulnerable to known exploits. So you have to establish a second, separate maintenance window, specifically for your backup servers and components, distinct from your regular production server updates. Many places find that manual installation of updates and reboots for backup components is actually preferred, gives you controlled execution. Typically involves pausing or disabling running backup jobs, doing the updates and reboots, verifying everything's okay, checking job status, then re-enabling the jobs, prevents nasty surprises. Number 5, schedule maintenance for firmware updates on all Veeam components. This one's often overlooked, but just as critical. Firmware and driver vulnerabilities, they're increasingly being exploited by sophisticated attackers, especially on NAS devices often used as backup repositories.
The low-level stuff.
Yeah, these low-level vulnerabilities can give attackers really deep control. So you must regularly schedule maintenance windows for updating firmware and drivers, not just on your physical VBR servers, but on any underlying hardware Veeam components run on, and critically, on all your NAS backup repositories. This is not a once a year if we remember task. It needs to be frequent. Proactive. Number 6, use Windows Firewall with only necessary ports. Look, the built-in Windows Firewall might not be an enterprise perimeter firewall, sure, but it's a crucial host-based defense. Should be enabled and configured properly. Keep the Windows Firewall on for all network profiles, public, private, domain, and only open ports explicitly needed for Veeam communication between its components. VBR server, proxies, repositories, agents. Lock it down. A critical example why this matters. That CVE-2025-23121 exploitation involved communication on TCP port 6170, which is a default Veeam business port. If your firewall is too permissive, attackers can talk to vulnerable services. Strictly limiting access is vital. Number 7, roles, users, and passwords. Ties back to least privilege again. Implement it rigorously. Give your backup admins, your backup service accounts, only the minimal permissions needed for their specific tasks. Use personal dedicated accounts for backup administrators. Make them members of a group with specific, finely tuned role permissions within Veeam. And crucially, always enforce strong, complex passwords for all these accounts. Minimum 20 characters. Highly recommended. Mix of lowercase, uppercase, numbers, special characters, overprivileged accounts, weak passwords. They're just a goldmine for attackers. An easy path right into your backups. Number 8. Use antivirus software with necessary exclusions. AV is essential on any server, including your VBR server and components. However, incorrect configuration can kill performance, or worse, stop the backup software working properly. So, install AV on all VBR servers, proxies, or repositories. But crucially, ensure the correct exclusions are configured. For Veeam's repository folders, application files, Veeam documents these exclusions. They stop the AD locking or scanning files Veeam is actively processing, prevents performance hits, job failures, even false positives that might disable critical protection.
So AV, yes, but configure it right so it doesn't break the backup process itself.
Exactly. Number 9. Enable authentication on ISCSI LUNs as repositories. ISCSI LUNs, often used as efficient block-level repositories for backup data. Good performance. But they're frequently configured with only IQN authentication, that's the ISCSI qualified name. Not robust enough against determined attackers, you must limit access to these LUNs. Only authorized Veeam components should see them. Beyond just IQN, implement challenge handshake authentication protocol. For authentication, look, SHAPE has its own limitations, sure, but it's way better than no password-based authentication at all. Adds an important defense layer for your ISCSI repositories. And finally, number 10, secure physical backup repositories. Use Veeam encryption. Physical security, just as important as cybersecurity, often forgotten. All physical backup devices, direct attached storage, NAS units, tape libraries secure them, usually in server rooms, restricted access, surveillance, access logs. But for second repositories, especially offsite ones that might be in less secure locations, or critically, for mobile backup repositories.
Like rotated USB drives, tapes, small NAS boxes people take home?
Exactly those. You must use Veeam encryption with a very strong, unique password. Think about the worst case. An unencrypted physical backup device falls into the wrong hands. Lost, stolen, improperly thrown out. That's total data loss, severe data breach. Completely bypasses all your cyber defenses. Encryption makes that data useless to anyone unauthorized.
That's incredibly detailed, really actionable advice. It's crystal clear that securing backups isn't a one-time setup. It's a continuous effort, needs ongoing vigilance. So what does all this mean for what's happening right now? Cybersecurity moves so fast. Even top software like Veeam faces critical challenges. Let's move to Section 5, the latest threats, Veeam vulnerabilities, and their exploitation.
Yeah, this brings us right up to some very recent, very pressing issues, and they highlight exactly why all those hardening steps we just talked about are so incredibly vital. Veeam recently had to issue urgent patches for several critical vulnerabilities in its backup and replication software. And these are not minor flaws we're talking about. Yeah. Let's start with CVE-2025-23121, classified as critical, remote code execution, RCE. It has a CVSS score of 9.9. 9.9 out of 10. That's about as bad as it gets. Pretty much. Its impact is severe. Allows remote code execution on the backup server itself by an authenticated domain user, meaning any standard domain user, not necessarily a high-privilege admin, could potentially exploit it. In relatively low-complexity attacks, this vulnerability affects Veeam Backup and Replication 12.3.11.139 and earlier version 12 builds, and critically, it specifically impacts domain-joined backup servers. The fix, resolved in Veeam Backup and Replication 12.3.2, build 12.3.2.3617. You can see clearly right. This vulnerability underscores the exact risk of domain-joining backup servers, the very practice Veeam explicitly advises against in its own security best practices.
Wow. So if you ignore that first hardening tip, you were directly exposed to this critical flaw, even if your admin accounts themselves were locked down tight.
Precisely. It's a backdoor opened by what seems like a common, maybe convenient configuration mistake. Next up, CVE-2025-24121. High severity CVSS score of 7.2. This flaw allows an authenticated user with the backup operator a role designed for backup tasks, but not full server admin to modify backup jobs. And that modification could then be leveraged to achieve arbitrary code execution. Impacts VBR 12.9.1139 and earlier V12 builds, also resolved in that same 12.3.2 patch. This one really emphasizes the need for strict least privilege, granular access controls, even for seemingly privileged or trusted roles like backup operators. You just can't assume any privileged role is inherently safe from being exploited. And finally, CVE 2025-24287, medium severity CVSS 6.1, allows local system users to modify directory contents, leading to arbitrary code execution with elevated permissions. But on the Veeam agent for Microsoft Windows this time, Fix agent version 6.3.1.1074 and earlier V6 builds. Fix released in version 6.2.2, build 6.3.2.1205. shows that even local vulnerabilities, ones that need an attacker to get some initial foothold first, can escalate to full system compromise if the agent software itself is vulnerable.
That's quite a cluster of vulnerabilities hitting Veeam recently. Is there some underlying theme? A common root cause making these RCEs pop up so often?
There is a very significant and yet somewhat troubling underlying theme. CVE 2025-23121 and also prior critical RCEs like CVE 2025-23120 back in March and CVE 2024-40711 from September last year. They're all instances of what are called uncontrolled deserialization vulnerabilities. And these specifically involve something called binary formatter.
Okay, binary format, deserialization. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Imagine your computer is like a chef following a recipe. Deserialization is basically the process of taking a set of instructions, a recipe for how to reconstruct a piece of data or an object, and turning it into an active program, a living object within the system. The problem with binary formatter is, well, it's like a recipe book that's far too trusting. It assumes all recipes submitted are safe, even if an attacker manages to sneak in a malicious one. So if an attacker crafts a harmful recipe, specially crafted data, and tricks your system into processing it through binary formatter, that system could then be commanded to do pretty much anything, like execute arbitrary malicious code.
Got it. So it's a known insecure component, basically deprecated by Microsoft itself, that Veeam has been using, and it's prone to these malicious recipe attacks.
Yes, that's the core of the criticism, essentially. Microsoft has explicitly deprecated binary formatter, stated it cannot be trusted for untrusted data, can never be made truly secure because of its inherent design risks. Currently, Veeam's approach has been to use an exclusion list or block list of what security researchers call gadgets, specific code snippets attackers exploit within binary formatter for these deserialization issues. However, security researchers have strongly criticized this. They see it as reactive, a whack-a-mole approach, arguing it inherently keeps the vendor one step behind the attackers because new gadgets, new ways to exploit the deserialization can always potentially be found.
So patching the known holes, but not fixing the leaky foundation.
That's a good analogy. But the good news is, Veeam's chief product officer has publicly acknowledged this fundamental issue, stated that version 13 of Backup and Replication planned for the second half of 2025 will completely remove binary formatter from its codebase. This is a significant architectural shift, a long-term fix designed to close this entire class of vulnerabilities for good.
That is a huge commitment, and definitely welcome for the long term. But it also means there's a definite window of risk until version 13 actually ships and gets deployed, right? Are ransomware groups actively exploiting these specific vulnerabilities in the wild now, or is this still mostly theoretical?
Unfortunately, no. It's far, far from theoretical. Ransomware gangs are very much actively targeting VBR servers, exploiting these flaws to achieve their objectives. Right now, this isn't just a concern for security researchers, it's happening in real-world attacks. For instance, Sophos XOps, a top security research team, observed well-known ransomware affiliates like Cuba and FIN7 actively exploiting CVE 2024-40711 back in October last year. And a new variant called Frag was seen using the same flaw in November. Other prominent groups like Cuba Ransomware, FIN7, they've also been observed exploiting various VBR vulnerabilities over time. Their motivation, crystal clear. Compromise VBR servers, simplify data exfiltration, make stealing data much easier. And more critically, block restoration efforts by deleting or encrypting backups. This makes it far more likely victims will pay the ransom. Their recovery options have just been nuked. So applying these patches promptly, it's not just a recommendation, it's a critical defensive measure that could literally save your organization from a catastrophic event.
Okay, even with the best defenses, the best hardening, the latest patches, new attack techniques can still sometimes get through. Prevention isn't 100% foolproof. Eventually, every organization might face a determined attacker. So what happens when ransomware does strike? How do you even know it's happening? And what can you actually do to detect it and respond effectively? Let's move to our final section, Section 6, detecting and responding to ransomware attacks.
Yeah, this is crucial because incident response always begins with detection. You can't respond if you don't know what's happening. A multi-layered approach, both preventative and detective, is absolutely essential. While we've covered a lot on prevention, let's quickly recap and maybe enhance some of those general strategies first as they tie into detection too. Vulnerability management, paramount. Not just patching, but patching promptly, especially server-side code, OS flaws, internet-facing services like RDP, VPN appliances, common entry points, include secure coding practices, removing unnecessary legacy services, SMB1, LLM&R, hardening high-risk services with restricted IPs, maybe IPsec, implementing security baselines like the CIS benchmarks, helps reduce that attack surface, and critically, removing local admin accounts where possible. Widespread MFA limits damage from stolen credentials.
Right, and protecting those initial entry points. Email, web browsing, still huge vectors.
Absolutely. For web and email protection, use web proxies. Block new unrated domains. Use robust email gateways. Block malicious content attachments. Implement sender validation, SPF, DKIM, DRRs. Vital. Anti-display name spoofing rules too. Integrating with malware detonation systems, sandboxes where you can safely execute suspicious files, observe behavior. Also key, network segmentation, still critical. Preventative control against lateral movement. Firewalls, ACLs, private VLANs, host-based firewalls. Deny logon rights to sensitive systems from less secure segments. Limits ransomware spreading once it gets that initial foothold. Browser isolation. Significant preventative control, especially for users. Local containerization, remote browser isolation. Keeps web-based infections contained. Stops them escaping to the host OS. Disposable remote browsers are particularly effective. New clean container each session. Malware detonation systems. Run potentially malicious files or tasks in VMs containers. Observe behavior safely. Aggressively abnormal behavior, crawling drives, mass encryption, renaming files, strong indicators of ransomware on the endpoints themselves. Endpoint detection and response, EDR solutions are indispensable. Use machine learning behavioral analysis. Identify block ransomware by file attributes, monitoring indicators of attack, IOAs.
IOA is like trying to delete shadow copies.
Exactly. Attempts to delete volume shadow copies, mass file read encrypt actions. EDRs look for that. Though, important note, sophisticated variants like Replace initially bypass some EDRs, shows the constant cat and mouse game. Need continuous EDR updates, tuning. Windows 10.11 also has controlled folder access, built-in ransomware protection, audits or blocks executables accessing sensitive folders. Generally effective, but again, Replace showed it could bypass it in block mode sometimes. Layered defense is key. And finally, never underestimate security awareness training. Educate users. Identify, report phishing, malicious links. Train them about ransomware tricks trying to get users to run files with elevated privileges. The human element remains a critical defense line.
Okay. So even with all those preventative layers, if an attack does get through, how do we spot it? What does the forensic investigation look like after a compromise? And what can we monitor in real time to catch it maybe as it happens?
Right. For forensic investigation, post-compromise analysis, once you suspect or confirm an incident, you put on your digital detective hat. You need to comb through system logs. Think of them as the security camera footage of your network. In Veeam specifically, a key log file to check is svc.vamount.log. Look for patterns like binary deserialization failed. That often indicates failed exploit attempts, maybe for vulnerabilities like CVE-2025-23121. Doesn't give you the attacker's IP usually, but gives you precise date-time stamps of attempts. Crucial for correlating with other events. In the Windows system logs, EVTX, especially the security logs, look for event ID 4624. Successful logons. If you see anonymous logon with logon type 3, that means a network connection, not local. Check the workstation name field. Might reveal the attacker's machine or the source of that connection. Strong recommendation. Just disable anonymous logon on your domain entirely. Prevent that kind of access or info disclosure. The SREM database, usually at cwindows-system32-logon.dat on Windows servers, can also be incredibly useful. Tracks network resource consumption by different processes. If you see unexpected outbound network flows to suspicious external IPs coming from a process like veeam.backup.mountservice.exe, which would normally only talk internally or to known backup targets, that's a very significant indicator of compromise. Now, for real-time monitoring, for security operations centers, SOCs, you need proactive detection, mechanisms that trigger alerts the moment suspicious behavior is seen. One key indicator, suspicious child processes. Monitor for processes like cmd.exe or PowerShell.exe, launching as child processes of veeam.backup.mountservice.exe, especially if they're running with NT authority system rights. It's a very strong indicator of successful exploitation. Like we saw with CVE-2025-23121, the malicious payload often executed this way, giving the attacker system-level access. EDR agents with specific behavioral rules can detect this immediately, potentially block it.
Ah, okay. So that's a great example of configuring security tools to watch for those specific known bad behaviors, like a digital tripwire. What other real-time network activity should SOC teams be looking for?
Beyond processes, network activity monitoring is crucial. Observe network flows from veeam.backup.mountservice.exe going to unknown or suspicious external machines, especially on unusual ports. For instance, in some exploits of CVE 2024-40711, veeam.backup.mountservice.exe made outbound connections on standard web port 80, but to the attacker's command and control server. Highly abnormal. Tools like Sysmin or EDR network telemetry can capture this. If a service like the Veeam service, which shouldn't have direct links to external workstations or C2 servers, shows interaction with an unknown external machine, highly suspicious. Immediate investigation needed. File integrity monitoring, FIM, is another powerful tool. Establish baselines of critical system files, config files, data files in your servers. If ransomware then modifies files within that baseline, encrypts, renames, deletes, an alert gets generated immediately. Real-time FIM is far more effective than just scheduled scans. Catches activity as it happens. File auditing, using Windows Event ID 4663 or Sysmin file event IDs, can help you look for unusually high volumes of file access, modification, or deletion. All strong indicators of ransomware grinding away. A clever technique here. Use honey tokens or honey files.
Fake bait files.
Exactly. Fake, innocuous files, strategically placed on your network, designed to attract ransomware or other malware. Any access to these files by a process triggers an immediate high-priority alert, gives you a very early warning that something malicious is poking around. And finally, process creation events, Windows Event ID 4688, Sysmin Event ID 1, EDR logs critical to monitor. Look for suspicious processes like sysadmin.exe being launched. Often used by ransomware to delete volume shadow copies makes recovery harder. Also monitor for any other unusual process trees, stemming from unexpected parent processes running with elevated privileges. These detection methods, both forensic and real-time, are just essential for identifying ransomware attacks swiftly and limiting their damage.
Wow. We have certainly unpacked a lot today. From that shifting landscape of ransomware where, our precious backups have become the primary target, all the way to the real nuts and bolts of hardening your backup infrastructure, even diving into specific critical vulnerabilities affecting widely used solutions like Veeam. What's absolutely clear, I think, is that cyber resilience truly starts with backup security. It's not a set it and forget it thing at all. It requires constant vigilance, layers of defense, and just an unwavering commitment to these best practices.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you, the listener, to really consider. Are your backups truly separated, truly isolated from your production systems? Can they be deleted or encrypted by compromised accounts, by rogue insiders? And perhaps most critically, when was the last time you rigorously, honestly tested them? To ensure they are 100% recoverable, the time to evaluate your backup strategy through a serious risk-based lens is absolutely now. Identify the gaps. Fortify those weak points. Invest in the solutions, the practices that ensure your recovery is a certainty, not just a hopeful question mark.
And that wraps up our deep dive into securing your backups against these constantly evolving threats. A huge thank you for joining us on this essential exploration. We also want to give another special thank you to our sponsor, Stonefly. As a leader in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions, they provide exactly the kind of secure, ransomware-proof storage options like air-gapped and immutable storage that are so critical in today's world. If you need robust data protection, definitely reach out to them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule the demo. Until next time, stay curious and stay secure.